Following turbulent 11 days since the start of the war in Iran and warnings of catastrophic consequences for the oil industry and global markets, is the war between Iran, the U.S. and Israel going as Donald Trump envisaged? To answer this and more, Mark Toth, the co-founder of IntRep 360, a platform focused on national security and foreign policy analysis, joins me on World News tonight. Mark, great to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining.
Great, thank you. Good to be here.
So with the latest developments in the Middle East, the attacks, their intensity, the volatile oil prices, do you think that Donald Trump is going to continue the war in Iran, or perhaps he's going to drop it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at high altitude, he has to continue this war. That's what his military advisors are going to be telling him. At this point in time, yes, the military destruction of Iran is going according to plan. There are some setbacks. The ability of Iranian drones to attack U.S. forces has been problematic, but they're not decisive and they're not diminishing U.S. Military power in the region. But the objectives in terms of regime change, in terms of securing the nuclear fissile material, the 460 kilos of highly enriched uranium to 60%, those two matters have not been solved. And so from that standpoint, Trump has to continue this war until ultimately you see the nuclear question or that file closed, but also some type of better regime than what we have. Because if Khamenei's son does end up being in power, we've heard that he's been announced as the leader, but no one has seen him yet other than AI images of him. Then he's going to be more radical than his father, and Iran will be only more dangerous going forward. And I don't think CENTCOM, in terms of managing the Straits of Hormuz going forward into the next decade, wants to deal with an even more radical version of Khamenei sitting in power into Iran. So I think this war continues, no matter what Trump may be signaling in the short term to manage oil expectations across the globe.
We've heard that after an election of the next Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, Donald Trump was reluctant to speak to him and to have any sort of a conversation when it comes to a potential ceasefire. Have we arrived at a point of no return when it comes to the way in which the previous Supreme Leader was being killed, where we're not going to see the U.S. speaking to Iran to find a common ground?
I think the U.S. wants to find someone. I think they were hopeful that that person might come from the IRGC itself, a Delcy Rodriguez type scenario, if you will, in Venezuela, but just transferred that onto the situation in Iran. I don't think that's going to happen. The IRGC is making it very clear on multiple levels that they intend to fight, and they are fighting, albeit asymmetrically, not in a conventional way. But they've also been heavily supportive of making sure that Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the Khamenei that was killed, is in power. But again, we don't know if even he knows he's in power. There's also reports out there that he was badly wounded in the strike that killed his father, and he may be propped up because, again, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, all we have is AI images of him. So it's interesting from my standpoint as an analyst, that the IRGC is wanting him. That means he's their candidate, but is using his imagery now to continue this fight. So from that standpoint, I do think it's past no return, because if you look at Khamenei's son's background, everything about him just says he's more radical than his father. His power base grew up through the IRGC itself. It also grew up in the economic empire behind them. And so he represents not just more of the same, but more of the same to an even greater level, and not in a good way. He'll be much worse as a leader.
Do you think that Israel and the U.S. are still on the same page when it comes to war in Iran, or are we starting to see some sort of polarization?
There could be some differences. Look, Trump has to manage the United States at this point in time in an election year. So oil obviously is an Achilles heel here, and he's trying to manage the idea that global oil markets have gotten out of control. We saw spiking over $100 a barrel. It's dropped off somewhat today. It's roughly $90 a barrel. The Brent crude price, when it first came on, today was trading at that. But I also noticed that options are basically pricing in price increases as well. So the world is betting so far, at least the options market, that this war continues. And so earlier it was reported by Axios that the U.S. had asked Israel to stop hitting oil and energy infrastructures. That Trump really views that still as simply a doomsday scenario. But I think that's a doomsday scenario that might well be in the making. Israel may just be ahead of that curve. So I don't know that they're not on the same page. It just may be that Israel is a page or two ahead of where the U.S. may have to get to. But I think Iran is going to try to force that doomsday scenario because they see that as an asymmetrical opportunity through oil, through closing the Straits of Hormuz, to fight back at the U.S. So the U.S. may get to where Israel is at, but just in a day or two more. Time will tell.
Mm-hmm. We need to talk Russia because we've heard about the suspension of sanctions on Russian oil. We've also heard an interesting quote from Vaibhav Ranghunandan, from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, who spoke to the BBC and said it's a bit of a gut punch for, I would say, Ukrainian support simply because this is a huge, huge oxygen boost for Russia, unquote. Donald Trump is said to have had a positive talk with Vladimir Putin over the phone. Do you think that President Trump will be more accommodating of Vladimir Putin right now as this whole situation in the Middle East unfolds?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it depends at what altitude you want to look at it at. I think all of us are concerned about the relationship that Trump has with Vladimir Putin. When the two meet, when the two talk, bad things seem to happen to Ukraine, and that's not good. And I don't find that acceptable, from my own personal standpoint. That said, I think a little bit of what we're seeing right now is Trump trying to manage Putin so that he doesn't come to a more active aid. We already have information that Russia is providing targeting information to Iran to hit U.S. forces and key assets in the region, including the THAAD radar systems, and probably trying to manage that somewhat to say, look, if I take these sanctions off, at least for now, and allow India to buy Russian oil, will you back off on that? There could be a bit of horse trading going on here, as we like to say in the United States. But I also think it's aimed at trying to keep Putin out, to become more actively involved in any meaningful way in what's going on in the war in Iran. It's unfortunate, though, for the messaging that it sends to Ukraine, because certainly they've earned better, not just from the U.S., but Europe as well. And anything that helps Russia helps the war that Russia is prosecuting against Ukraine. And that's not good. The only thing that I might add, though, there is a double-edged sword here, because if oil prices go higher, that lifts all boats, and that ultimately helps Putin. So if Putin is trading off the black market to places like India, et cetera, without these sanctions, that'll help somewhat suppress oil revenues, so he makes a little less. So it's not a one-to-one type scenario. Like anything in life, it's somewhat complicated and double-edged.
Mm-hmm. Just before we go, I wanted to bring a statement because we know that Ukraine sent a team of drone experts to aid the U.S. in the Middle East because of the costs that this war is incurring. As we read in a statement by President Zelensky, those seeking support from Ukraine must continue to assist our defense, especially our air defense. Last year, we proposed an agreement to the United States regarding drones. This is the right approach, cooperating with us on drone production and deployment. Is this how Ukraine can really get its foot in the door with the U.S. to make sure that Russia is not getting its way in its entirety when it comes to the U.S., when it comes to potential peace talks in the future?
Yeah, it should. Look, Ukraine a year ago could have avoided, on behalf of the United States, a lot of the problems that we're seeing, including the destruction of some very expensive radar systems for the THAAD in Jordan, as well as in Kuwait, that we've seen the Iranians hit with very basically cheap Shahed drones. And that help was refused a year ago. And I think that's a scandal that'll come out more in the U.S. in the days ahead, or at least in the days and months after this war finally concludes, why we didn't take that. It should be the card that Trump keeps claiming that Ukraine doesn't have. Unfortunately, so far, what we've seen out of Trump himself is he's trying to downplay Ukraine's contribution to this type of drone defense that they're now offering to the Gulf states in particular to stop these Iranian drones from being able to hit port facilities, oil refineries. They've even hit office buildings as well as the airport. Again, this is something that the U.S. should have been in front of curve-wise, and they simply weren't. Day late, dollar short, and the Ukrainians were there. But unfortunately, I don't think Trump's going to give them enough credit for that. I think he's still after trying to force Ukraine into a peace deal with Russia. And I think in that regard, it's not going to be the playing card that all of us would hope that it would be, even though Ukraine deserves that. because it would have helped tremendously. And at this point in time, one last quick point here: Ukraine is not likely to get any air defense assets that they need desperately now, anytime soon, given just the needs the interceptor requires, et cetera, that are used for Patriots in the Mideast until this war is over. So it's going to be a difficult climb for Ukraine for the next couple of weeks.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, Mark, but unfortunately our time on the program has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining me on the program, and I hope we get to continue this conversation. Mark Toth, the co-founder of IntRep 360, was my guest here on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so this would be all for now. Thank you for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more in just a moment. Until then, good night.